How about some action?
Once upon a time when the genre was young, the first-person shooter was simply called a Doom clone. And in the 90s, the best of the Doom clones were the build engine games made by 3D Realms. Duke Nukem, Shadow Warrior, Blood. Indeed, while their gameplay copied much of Doom's formula, these games resonated with gamers for their realistic and interactive environments and larger-than-life characters.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto.
24 years after the build engine's creation, 3D Realms has dusted off this tried-and-true engine to bring us Ion Fury. Originally released a year ago, Ion Fury has finally come to consoles, with our focus today being on the Nintendo Switch port. As you'll soon see, Ion Fury is a solid but frustrating shooter with a port job that leaves much to be desired. Now, I realize a lot of you might be watching just to find out how the Switch port turned out. So before we start talking about the game itself, let's go over a few specifics. As I said before, Ion Fury was developed in the build engine, but in reality, the game was created using a source port called eDuke 32. Essentially, this allows the code to run on current operating systems and add some modern touches like better lighting, particle effects, and the ability to have full mouse look without the geometry warping. eDuke also allows for much larger levels to be built in the engine and to have rooms built on top of rooms, something that was impossible in the original tech. On PC, Ion Fury runs at 60 frames per second with resolutions as high as 5K. On the Switch, the game runs at 1080p docked, 720 handheld, and 30 frames per second. Now, a shooter running at 30 frames per second on the Switch is not unusual, but a shooter built on 24-year-old tech running at 30 frames makes me raise an eyebrow, especially since the PS4 and Xbox versions run at 60 frames per second. According to a recent Digital Foundry video on the subject, this was due to unforeseen difficulties in bringing eDuke 32 to console hardware. I'll link the video at the top, it's quite fascinating. Ultimately, what this means is that Ion Fury on the Switch runs at half the frame rate of its console counterparts, and it's not very stable. Smaller, maze-like environments perform just fine, but it's when you get into Ion Fury's larger, more complicated environments that you start to feel the chop. Worse yet, explosions or heavy use of particle effects can make the frame rate tank to the point of full-on hitching. It's not great. Something that irked me is that I found out, pretty much at the time of writing this, that there is a cheat code in the game that lets you unlock the frame rate to 60 frames a second. A little irritating considering I played through and captured the game at 30 frames. I tested this out for myself and sure enough, the frame rate unlocked and got silkier. But yeah, as soon as I started to get into the thick of it, the frames started to dip wildly. So whether you play in 30 or 60, the Switch's frame rate is not great at all. Regardless, I don't understand why this feature is a cheat code. Wouldn't it make more sense to have this be a feature you can toggle in the options menu with a warning about poor performance if you use it? My attitude is that since this is a hidden feature and something most people won't be aware of, I am forming my opinion on the 30 FPS version. Frame rate is not the only issue with this port though. Auto-saving makes the game freeze for several seconds, something that's almost instantaneous on the PC version, and there are numerous glitches and bugs, most commonly the level geometry spazzing out. The worst is this insane bug that causes Shelly to flip 180 degrees during gameplay. This was a recurring problem throughout my playthrough and not a great thing to happen during a firefight. Now, this version is not unplayable, and if it is your only option for playing this game, it will serve you just fine, assuming you can tolerate these issues. But if you have a choice in the system, I can't recommend this version. You are far better off playing this on the PS4, Xbox, or PC. Apparently, there will be patches available in the near future to fix some of these problems, but until then, this version is just not up to snuff. Okay, now let's actually get into the game.
You're lucky I can't fit a grenade launcher in my bag.
You are Shelly Bombshell Harrison, a bomb disposal expert trying to get her buzz on when all hell breaks loose. An army of cybernetic humans led by the evil Dr. Haskell begin to attack downtown Neo D.C. It's now up to Shelly to take down Dr. Haskell and his twisted army and get herself a proper drink.
Sit down, little girl. This is your final warning.
What are you gonna do? Send me to my room?
Ion Fury is a classic first-person shooter through and through, seeing you rampage through beautiful retro cyberpunk environments, spraying and causing all sorts of praying, as you splatter enemy after enemy with an arsenal of weapons, all the while listening to Shelly's one-liners referencing 80s and 90s pop culture.
Oh my god, the quarterback is toast!
What's immediately evident is how much sweet, pixelated juice developer Voidpoint was able to squeeze out of the build engine. The environments of this game are simply stunning. Attention to detail is off the charts. Throughout my playthrough, I would just stop and take a couple minutes to examine each of the environments, look at all the little details, and find all sorts of things to interact with. At one point, you find a fully working piano complete with metronome. I don't know what it is, but there's something about seeing this much functionality with this low of fidelity that makes me smile. While high polygon counts make things look more realistic, it's little touches like this that makes the world feel more believable. Shelly's arsenal is surprisingly underwhelming. These are solid weapons and there are a couple standouts, but for the most part they are pretty run-of-the-mill. First up is Loverboy, Shelly's pistol that shoots 3 rounds at a time. This is really just window dressing though, because it doesn't feel any different from your typical FPS pistol and doesn't seem to kill your enemies any better or worse. Its alternate fire is another story though, allowing you to lock onto multiple enemies at a time and blast them away like a desperado. This is especially handy when taking out the spiders and drones, who we'll get to later. The disperser is a combination shotgun and grenade launcher. Now the grenade launcher part works great with the player able to bounce grenades off of surfaces, which is awesome for killing those hard to reach enemies and getting the upper hand on an ambush. However, the splash damage is pretty inconsistent. You either need to get a direct hit or have the grenade land an inch away for it to do anything. The shotgun part is fine. It definitely does the trick of killing the lower enemies good and fast, but it has a surprisingly narrow spread and is actually pretty effective at longer ranges. It kind of behaves more like a chunky semi-auto rifle than a shotgun. The submachine guns shoot flaming bullets that will set your enemies ablaze. You can also wield them akimbo, which is always a treat. They are not the most powerful weapon, but they can be the most efficient, seeing as how only a few rounds can catch a goon on fire, leaving you to walk away as they turn to ashes. But be cautious, baddies can still shoot you when on fire. The crossbow shoots electrified darts that can stun lock your enemies. The alt fire can also shoot 6 darts at a time, which is great for clearing out rooms or groups of enemies. There's not much more to this weapon, however, if you hold down the alt fire button long enough, the bow can shoot out a continuous stream of darts, which is probably the most devastating attack in your arsenal. Mines can be thrown or stuck to walls as fun little surprises for your targets, but let's be real, these suckers are always going to be thrown like grenades. It just works way better. The chain gun is a chain gun, revs up to shoot a lot of bullets and is great for bigger enemies. Nothing new or special here, move on. Next up, we have the bowling bombs, which are the best weapon in the game. Shelly rolls these little beauties on the ground just like skee balls, and they seek out enemies and turn them into piles of red goo. If they don't kill anything, no sweat, you can pick them right back up, which is wise because they are not a common pickup. Well, at least not until the final boss, but we'll get to that. Last but not least is Shelly's stun baton, aka the electrifier, a good old-fashioned melee weapon whose attack animations are quite fun to watch. But the alt fire sees Shelly jam the stick forward and unleash a continuous electrical attack. Now, it's unlikely you'll use this weapon in combat often, but it does come into play for powering up generators, key for solving puzzles and progression. Also, I'm cool with this game having reloading in it. It's not really necessary for this type of shooter, but hey, maybe next time it might be wise to tell me how many bullets I have in a clip. Like the weapons, most of the enemies are fairly forgettable too. You got your basic yellow guys who you can just plow through, then the red guys that shoot you with the crossbow. You can hear them charging up the weapon to shoot a volley of projectiles at you, which will eat up most of your health, so always focus on them first. The dark-suited special ops guys can be a little trickier because they use the disperser and love shooting grenades at you, but are easily felled by their own weapons. Other highlights are these crazy mutants that charge you, easily killed by explosives as long as you keep your distance, and these tall, muscled boys with burning blue heads. These nutty dudes can actually teleport around the map and self-destruct when they are killed. Super fun to fight. Really, they are. And then there's the spiders and the drones, who are the bane of my existence. I'm not kidding, if there are 2 enemies that came close to ruining this game for me, it's these 2 game design missteps. Both of these little bastards are difficult to shoot, exacerbated by the fact that aiming on the Switch is not the most precise thing in the world. These are enemies meant for the mouse and keyboard, and even then they still suck to fight. Spiders come at you at hordes and jump around like they're the House of Pain. You would think Shelly's electrifier would do the trick, but they're a pain to kill even with that. Your best solution is to use the alt fire on Loverboy or just chuck a precious bowling bomb at them. And the game is very liberal with the spiders. They will pester you throughout the whole experience. But hey, let's now take the spiders, make them airborne and silent, and have the ability to shoot you. I swear to God, the drones know when you are aiming at them because they dodge your crosshair faster than a politician dodges blame. They're incredibly annoying. Look, game developers, I understand Valve popularized these types of enemies with headcrabs and manhacks, both equally annoying, but they made you fight these in between major firefights, not in between and during. Plus, it's not like the level design helps with any of this. On the whole, the levels of Ion Fury are very well designed. They generally make for fun combat situations and are saturated with secrets. But the levels in the first act of the game, the levels within Neo D.C, are the weakest levels in the whole game, for one key reason. They're too damn big. Often you're in these huge areas with tons of verticality and hidden vantage points with enemies sprinkled everywhere. It is common to walk into these places and get absolutely rocked by gunfire from every angle. The color schemes of the enemies make it so they blend into the environment, and if they're clear across the map, which they often are, it can be really hard to see them. Get used to just getting randomly shot by enemies in some obscure corner of the map. It was a minor problem in older build engine games, but it's a major problem in Ion Fury. What's worse is that there's this sort of shadowy fog of war on these maps that can obscure these enemies, and while you can't see them, they can definitely see you and have perfect accuracy. It's annoying. I've used that word several times in this review so far, and honestly, it's the best way I can sum up my initial impression of Ion Fury. Annoying. This is a solid shooter, don't get me wrong, and I love the general vibe and presentation of it, but there are just these dumb little choices that make the game so irritating at times, and all of these annoyances climax with the first boss of the game, which is just a mess.
I'm gonna kick your shiny metal ass.
The first boss is this giant mech that could have been ripped straight out of RoboCop, which is a good thing. Love RoboCop. This mech has 2 attacks, lobbing grenades and a hit-scanning chain gun, because you know, nothing says fair like a hit scanner. I died multiple times trying to kill this giant metal bullet sponge, and to make matters worse, I barely had enough ammo to finish the fight. Now, I could be to blame for this for not conserving my ammo in a 90s shooter, but there are barely enough ammo pickups in the map to begin with, which kind of makes things needlessly difficult. Making matters worse, the map is constantly spawning in drones and spiders. Oh gee, my favorites! After enough trial and error, the boss fight devolved into this. Just circling around him and shooting him with a shotgun. Real stimulating stuff. I almost had him too, and suddenly I was killed by a random enemy. Oh wow. Then it was all clear. The devs figured out how easy it was to cheese this fight. So they had the 2 most annoying enemy types spawn in constantly to discourage players from using this strategy. Yeah, real solid stuff. Oh, and the cherry topper? Look at this frame rate. Look at it. At least you get a chain gun in the end.
Where does he get these wonderful toys?
Now, I've been a little harsh on Ion Fury so far, but here's the thing. After I got through these first Neo D.C levels and beat the boss, I really started to enjoy my time with Ion Fury. Your next set of levels takes you into this huge office building where you fight through each floor, eventually hitting the penthouse at the top. And it's this string of levels that's the real turning point for the game. The devs stop focusing on making grand, spectacular levels on aging tech and start to hone in on tight FPS level design. Maze-like levels with more focus on navigation and close quarters combat are exactly the thing that made the old build engine games so much fun to begin with. I got lost in them a few times, which was annoying, but I was always able to get right back on track. Even the weapons become more enjoyable to use. You'll realize their design makes way more sense when fighting within corridors. Plus, because of this shift in design, the performance becomes far more stable. Even the next boss fight is an improvement. It's still not great. You fight this big old dropship that you can trick into shooting itself if you circle it during its attack runs, and they give you unlimited chain gun ammo, which is maybe a bit of an overcorrection to the lack of ammo in the first fight, but at least it looks cool and it isn't frustrating.
Well, isn't this a breath of fresh air?
You said it, Shelly. When you hit the final act of the game, you come to this outdoor area, which is a welcome break from the cyberpunk madness of the previous chapters. Also, look at this happy-looking environment. Kinda reminds me of an old N64 platformer. This is the beginning of the best levels in Ion Fury. You first fight through this abandoned hospital, which eventually leads to this abandoned mansion, which is full of secret passageways and this awesome courtyard battle. Yes, you still encounter some open areas later in the game, but now the darkness fog is lifted and you can actually spot enemies more easily, making for less cheap deaths. Eventually, you hit these underground labs, which is the most fun I had in the game. They're big, complicated levels with environmental puzzles that are well designed and make for the most enjoyable combat situations. All the things that were driving me crazy at the beginning of the game were a distant memory. Alright, what's left? Oh yeah, the final boss. Oh boy.
You've really put a damper on my day, Shelly.
Okay, the final boss is a joke. You come to this giant circular arena with this dome at the center protecting Dr. Haskell. There's enemies everywhere and these spinning electrical beams that you have to jump over. It's madness. But then you discover these unlimited bowling bomb dispensers. So you know what that means? Run around the outer edge of the dome and just keep lobbing bombs. If you run out, get a refill. Then after you kill all the enemies, run around the arena not knowing what the hell to do, then find this hole at the top of the dome and lob like 20 bombs in there until you get pushed away. Rinse, repeat. So the first boss you make super cheap and give me nothing to work with, and then the final boss you make it so I can beat it in my sleep. Okay. At the very last gasp, they send an army of mutants at you. Definitely scary, but once again, unlimited bowling bombs. Either blow them all away or just ignore them and finish the fight. That's it. So, is Ion Fury good? Look, as much as the first third of the game pissed me off, the remaining 2/3 did a lot to turn my opinion around. It's a good, solid shooter and an awesome throwback to the golden days of the genre. Voidpoint has worked some straight-up voodoo magic with the build engine, and despite my issues with some of their design choices, I really hope they follow up Ion Fury with a sequel or create another title within the build engine. If you grew up playing classic build engine games or first-person shooters in general, I would recommend checking this one out simply to see the technical wizardry on display here. But if you're a fan of more contemporary shooters, I don't think this one will do much for you. If anything, play through Duke Nukem 3D or Shadow Warrior first, and if you enjoy this style of game, then yeah, give Ion Fury a shot. Just don't play it on the Switch if you have a choice. But what do you guys think? Think I'm right on the money with this one, or am I being too much of a harsh critic? Be sure to let me know in the comments. Also, if there's another classic first-person shooter or game in general you'd like to see me cover, feel free to suggest. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click the like icon. I post videos weekly, so be sure to hit that bell so you are the first to know. Also, I recently hit 300 subscribers, so I want to say a huge thank you to all my current and recent subscribers. Making videos has been a ton of fun and has been keeping me sane during quarantine. I hope all of you are staying healthy and sane in your own ways. Once again, a huge thank you to all of you. I'm Kirk, and until next time, stay safe out there.